Good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm so excited to welcome you to tonight's webinar featuring Brittany K. Barnett, interviewed by Jean Bishop. Thanks for attending. FAN is a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, social justice, and lots more. We have about 100 past videos of past events archived on our website and on our YouTube channel, so be sure to explore. While working several years ago as a corporate attorney, Brittany K. Barnett was committed to pro bono representation. Hold on, I just had a poll results popped up. Was committed to pro bono representation of clients sentenced to federal prison under merciless drug laws. Her dedication to this life-changing work paid off tremendously, resulting in freedom for numerous people serving life sentences for federal drug offenses, including 7 clients who received executive clemency from President Barack Obama. As the daughter of a formerly incarcerated mother, Ms. Barnett knows firsthand the impact of mass incarceration is far-reaching, devastating families and entire communities. Dedicated to transforming the criminal justice system, she founded 2 nonprofits to carry out her life's work. The Buried Alive Project, which works to dismantle life without parole sentences handed down under federal drug laws, and Girls Embracing Mothers, dedicated to empowering girls with mothers in prison. Jean Bishop is a public defender in the Cook County Public Defender's Office and an adjunct law professor in trial advocacy at Northwestern University's Pritzker School of Law, where she received the school's Alumni Award for Public Service. Ms. Bishop is the sister of Nancy Bishop Langert, who was murdered in 1990, along with her husband and their unborn baby. Since the murders of her family members, Ms. Bishop has been a passionate voice for forgiveness and mercy, particularly in the criminal justice system. She appears in several documentaries, 2 TEDx talks, and the CBS 48 Hours segment, Road to Redemption. Ms. Bishop is the author of a memoir, Change of Heart, Justice, Mercy, and Making Peace with My Sister's Killer, and the recently released Grace from the Rubble, 2 Fathers' Road to Reconciliation after the Oklahoma City bombing. It is my deep pleasure to now introduce and welcome Brittany K. Barnett and Jean Bishop.
Well, Brittany K. Barnett, what a pleasure to talk with you about this powerful book you've written, just so compelling and so beautifully done. I just want to start with the beginning, which is you dedicate this book to your grandmother, to Lena Reed Barnett. And I just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about her and how she shaped your journey.
Hi, Jean. It's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight. My grandmother, Lena Reed Barnett, was the matriarch of our family. She was just the purest love I've ever known. There's nothing like grandmothers, but as I always say, there's nothing like grandmothers from the South. And she stepped up and was like a mother to me. As I was writing A Knock at Midnight and finishing the first draft of the book, she passed away at 84. And it was devastating. You know, she was the type of person that I thought would be around forever. And so it was all that I could do, you know, to dedicate this book to her and to truly dedicate my life to her.
So you grew up in Fulbright, Texas, and your mom's name is Evelyn Fulbright. And you were surrounded on your street by all this extended family. I mean, and what was that like?
You know, it was incredible, truly. Like the town was about 150 people in rural East Texas. And on the street, about 2 miles long, there were about a third of Fulbright's residents, which was all family. And so it was really, really great. You know, we could knock on any of those doors and ask for anything that we needed. And it really embedded in me that deep knowledge of how important family is. So it was a phenomenal experience that I would not trade for anything.
Your description of the family meals when everyone would gather together made me want to be a guest. It just sounded like so much fun. So you quote the poet Nikki Giovanni at the beginning of the first part of your book. Black love is Black wealth. Talk about that. Black love, Black wealth.
Well, first, just all due respect to Nikki Giovanni. I adore her and her work. And there in that town of Fulbright, in East Texas with my extended family, you know, our whole family epitomized Black love is Black wealth. I am because my family is. And we're so close. But during that and in that poem that Nikki Giovanni writes called Nikki Rosa, she says, Black love is Black wealth. And they'll probably look at my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. And there's so much in that poem and just shows the complexity of life, the complexity of Black life in the South, and even through all the hardships, just how we continue to move on, you know, through that love. You know, without that love, I'm not sure where I would be, and I'm not sure where many members of my family would be, you know. And so it was not easy growing up in that small town of rural East Texas of Fulbright. My mom and I and my little sister moved into my great grandparents' old home. You know, it was an old wooden home with concrete floors, and we had to put plastic over the windows in the winter to stay warm, you know. But we never wanted for anything, you know. At least if we did, we never knew it, because Black love is definitely Black wealth.
Yeah, and you had a pretty happy childhood, you and your little sister Jazz, until you started noticing things about your mom. I think it was a pair of shorts that your sister had pulled a kind of a tube out of a pocket, and she didn't know what it was, but you did.
Yeah, I will never forget, Jean. I was around 10, and I'm beating on the door for my annoying little sister to hurry up in the bathroom. And when she opens the door, just in her innocent 9-year-old way, she says, Brittany, what's this? And she's holding a tampon-shaped glass object in her hand. And I just remember jerking it from her and pushing her out the bathroom and saying, Jazz, stay out of mama's stuff. And I put that tampon glass object back where I had seen it once, in my mom's blue jean shorts that she kept in the bathroom. And I knew, even at 10, that was a crack pipe. And I just knew I didn't want my sister to know what it was.
Your mom was, you know, such a hardworking woman, and she had a job, a career that she loved, but you started to see her sink more and more under this addiction.
I did. And it was such a confusing time in my life. You know, even at 10, I just felt as if I could fix her. You know, as disaster kind of unfolds and my tiny arms reach away, I just felt I could fix my mama. And now, you know, I recognize I can't fix her, or I couldn't at 10 especially, and that wasn't my burden to bear. And so I had this journey as my mom's addiction worsened and I got older. I had this journey of realization and awareness about addiction. And it's kind of funny because during that time, I'm an 80s baby. So during this time was when the Just Say No drug prevention programs were out. It was when the DARE program was in place, you know, and during this time, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, we're taught in school to just say no. And in a sense of how people who do become addicted to drugs are the weakest among us, the morally corrupt among us, you know. And so I have this view and this conflicting view of a woman that birthed me, that I love wholeheartedly, that's suffering, you know. And so it was a very confusing time for my young teenage self.
And it was a time when the drug war was just starting to rumble in the background. And you write so compellingly in your book that, you know, when the drug war came, it came with a vengeance, and it came straight for your mother.
Yes, it was devastating. My mother had worked so hard, and my sister and I had watched her put herself through nursing school, working second shift, taking care of two little girls who were just 18 months apart, you know, and just this strong, determined woman. And unfortunately, the addiction to crack cocaine became stronger than her for a while.
So you had to move out of that house where you were living with your mom, and talk about where you went and how that kind of directed your journey.
Yeah, my mom, after that crack pipe incident, a few months after, my mom went to rehab. And my sister and I moved for a year with my grandparents, with Mama Lena. And I just knew, you know, my mom was going to get better. And during this time with my grandparents, my dad still lived with my grandparents as well. My parents were very young when I was born. My dad was 17, my mom was 18. And my grandparents were just crucial to my life. And I would just always have these amazing talks with my grandfather and go fishing with him at the pond in front of their house. And he'd always bait the hook for me so my hands wouldn't get dirty. And it was just a lot of love. I had a lot of extended family that, in a way, looking back, were compensating for what my sister and I were going through with our mother. Unfortunately, when my mom got out of rehab, you know, she didn't get better. She was worse. And so I moved back with my mom, my sister, and I for a couple of more years, and till I was around 14. And I wanted to get away. I wanted to get away from the downward spiral I saw of my mom, the emotional roller coasters, the continuing to deny the very existence of her addiction and my family. And so I left, and I went back to my sole refuge, which was Mama Lena's house.
What do you want people to know about what it's like to be a child in that horrible predicament, right?
I want people to know, as a child, there are so many emotions that you experience. Even during that time, you know, my mom didn't feel we knew what was going on, or I've seen it after where parents are addicted and they don't feel their children know. And I think we have to stop underestimating our kids. You know, I knew at 10, I knew exactly what was happening. And that impacted me a lot. And to know that even though this addiction is happening and you may feel that it's your addiction alone to bear, that the entire family is bearing it. Like I said, I was 10 and I thought I could fix my mom. And, you know, quite frankly, I'm 36 now, and I still am healing from the thinking I can fix everybody, you know?
Right, right. So even though all of this kind of turmoil with your mom was going on, you were a great reader as a child. You watched TV and saw a lawyer, a character, Claire Huxtable, who wore a suit and had a briefcase, and you kind of saw in her a future self, possibly.
Yes, I wanted to be her. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to wear the power suits, you know, and from that, as early as first grade, you know, wanted to be a lawyer. And unfortunately, in the rural community I grew up in, there were no lawyers at all. And there definitely weren't any lawyers who looked like me. And so Claire Huxtable was the closest lawyer that I knew, you know, or thought I knew.
One of your first encounters with the real legal system was in the courthouse in Clarksville that you write about, this very small town courthouse where your mom's case was, right?
Right.
you write about the fact that there are file cabinets in the basement that have the records of slave sales. And you contrast that with the reality that this drug war is now starting to scoop up a lot of Black Americans like your mother, and that there are financial incentives for local governments to do that. Talk about that.
Yes, so Red River County was the county where I grew up, and there's about 8,000 people in Clarksville, the county seat, and really realizing how funding, billions of dollars in funding was being funneled from the federal government to local governments like Red River County to lock people up, essentially. It was eye-opening for me, especially as I got older and knowing and understanding now the disease of addiction, and seeing my mom being criminally penalized for basically committing a crime against herself, if you will, and not getting help.
Right, and you were dating a guy at one point named Red who was dealing drugs himself.
I was. As I said before, I grew up an 80s baby, and in the Black community during that time, especially at the height of the war on drugs, you either knew someone selling drugs or knew someone using drugs. And it was just a shared experience, that we all had. And it was something we didn't think a lot about, but we knew there was a lot of struggle for survival. And we knew that there were not a lot of economic opportunities for people, and people were doing what they felt was right in order to survive. And so I did. In high school, I dated a drug dealer. And while I don't know or didn't know the depths of what he was doing, I knew that he sold drugs. And I thought not much about it at all.
Yeah, and so he was violent and abusive, and you were able to escape from him. And you ended up being the first person in your family to go to university.
Yes.
Studying on a track, kind of a finance track, right? And not the law.
I was. So I found the strength and through my family to get out of that abusive relationship. And it made me so much stronger, Jean. And by that time, unfortunately, my dreams of becoming a lawyer had all but faded. I just felt at the time becoming a lawyer was something that was out of my league. And I actually read a book in high school, a B.B. Moore book, and the main character in the book was a Black woman, and she worked at a bank. And after reading that book, I said, oh, I can do that. I'll do that too. I'll go get a degree in accounting and I'll work at a bank. And so that's how I ended up on that business track.
And then you decided that there's this idea of value added, and thought maybe a law degree would kind of add more to what you were doing in the financial world. Exactly.
I never fully let go of the grip of my dream of becoming a lawyer. And a close friend of mine was going to law school, and I just remember thinking, wait a minute, if he can go to law school, I can go to law school, and that was just the boost I needed. That was the representation I needed.
So this is around the moment that the horrendous turn, happened in your life, and your mom actually went to prison.
Yes.
And you and your little sister Jazz would have to drive a long way to go to these grim surroundings and visit her. And I think you described so beautifully in the book what it's like to go to a prison as a visitor, and then just some of the dehumanizing conditions. You got to the prison and asked, they were looking up where your mom was, and they said, oh, she's in the dog pound. Dog pound being a part of the prison, and that was their name for it. You describe a little boy who got yelled at, and just the experience of seeing people have these numbers instead of their names. And as a public defender, I've seen that so often in so many prisons, where my clients literally have numbers, written on their arms in magic marker, and they're called out by their number and not their name. I mean, what was that like for you to see your own mom that you love so much in those prison conditions?
Jean, there are millions of children in the world today with incarcerated parents, mothers and fathers. But there is something different when it's your mama. It's like a primal wound. And those visits, just from the moment you drive onto the parking lot, is dehumanizing. You feel the heavy weight of incarceration. And I'll never forget the first visit with my mom. You talk about the dog pound, and I was nervous. I had extended family members go to jail and prison before, but I'd never been in a prison. And here I am, I'm 22 years old, and I'm going to get in the line to go through the metal detector because everyone gets searched. And the guard kind of barked at me, "Do you have underwire in your bra?" And I panicked. I remember thinking to myself, do I? Like, I don't know. What if I do? Are they going to send me home? I just drove 2.5 hours to get here. Luckily I didn't, but just there was trauma even in that small moment,
I so stopped and almost laughed when I read that, because on my way into a federal prison once, I had underwire in my bra, and they wouldn't let me in at all without it. And the latest, the newest and nearest place was like 12 miles away. So I used one of those staple remover things to pull the wire out of the bra so I could go in.
Wow. It's something, and it's almost, it can be so overwhelming. It can impact your entire visit with your loved one.
Right.
And so there was just so much of that, and just the metal, the clanking, the key. Like, I still hear the keys jiggling from the guards. It's traumatic for everybody.
Your mom emerged from prison finally, and you talk with such pride about her sobriety, her, beating the drug addiction. And you say in your book that your mom got sober despite prison and her sufferings there, not because of it. You said that enormous victory belongs to Evelyn Fulbright, not to the institution that tried to break her.
Absolutely, absolutely. My mother's addiction was criminalized, and that is a true indictment of America's legal system. My mother needed treatment, not her liberty stripped. And she found it deep within herself, that Fulbright determination and will that we had seen as she put herself through nursing school. And my mom became sober. And that was such a turning point in our lives. We had our mama back, and I can with pride say that my mom has been sober for 14 years now. She's been home for 12. And it's just, there's no greater feeling.
It's so riveting the way you start your book, because you actually don't begin the story in your book with the story we've just talked about, your family, your mom. You start with a woman named Sharonda, and you tell the story of her being charged with a drug offense, going to court, putting money in the meter because she thinks she's coming back in a couple of hours when the court proceeding's over. She tucks her purse in the back seat of the car, expecting to come back to the purse, and then going, later on to work at this restaurant that she owns. She's a mom of a daughter, Clinisha, and she went into court with a lawyer who told her, "Don't worry about it. They don't have any evidence against you. They can't prove anything." She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Never been convicted before, first offense, right? Nonviolent drug offense. And you write in that opening, part of your book that she never saw her purse, her car, or her restaurant again. And it wasn't until Clinisha was in her 20s, I think, right, that Sharonda was able to get out. And you said that Sharonda When you saw Sharonda, you saw your mom, that woman, that young woman, that mother who had been incarcerated. How did that impact you when you first heard Sharonda's story?
Sharonda Jones's story changed my life forever. I had gone to law school by then, and I was in Dallas at SMU's Dedman School of Law in their renowned Underwood Law Library, researching for a paper I was writing for critical race theory course that I was taking. And in my paper, I wanted to talk about the war on drugs and the disproportionate sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine. But I wanted to do much more than that. I wanted to humanize the issue. It was so important for me to show the human element of this. And I'd had a childhood friend, Keon Mitchell, growing up, who had been sentenced to life for drugs at 23 years old. And I, for the longest, thought Keon's case was an anomaly. Like, this is rural East Texas justice. But I wanted to talk about his case in my paper, but I also wanted to include a woman, because now women in prison is a population of people that I had grown very close to and had this heightened sense of compassion and empathy for. And I did a Google search late that night in the law library, and I typed in federal life sentence drugs, and Sharonda Jones's story pulled up. And I listened to her story and how she had never been in trouble before, not even for a traffic ticket, how she was charged with drug conspiracy and never caught with any drugs or on any surveillance or found with large sums of money, on how just the testimony of others was enough to convict her. And beyond her case, I saw Sharonda, and I saw my mom. I saw a reflection of myself. Sharonda is also a Black daughter of the rural South who had dreams and goals just like I did. You know, unfortunately, they were restricted by her circumstances. And her case, Jean, just tugged at my soul. And as a law student, I was in my second year of law school, and I sent her a card. And I told her I was a law student and I had come across her case and that I wanted to help her get out of prison.
Help us understand how a woman who's never been in trouble before gets a life sentence. You do it so well in the book. You talk about two things, stacking and snitches. Talk about that. What is stacking?
Stacking is in federal courts, state courts, where prosecutors just pile on the charges, the maximum extent of the law. And in Sharonda's case, I'll back up just a little bit. As I researched my paper, in 1986, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And in this act, Jean, as I'm sure you know, it implemented mandatory minimums, and it created this 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, which means that you could have 500 grams of powder cocaine. I could only have 5 grams of crack, and we would receive the same sentence in prison. Well,
Right.
It's not lost on anyone, you know, especially now that at the time, a lot of wealthy, affluent white people were using powder cocaine, and a lot of crack was found in Black communities.
Right.
And so law created this huge disproportionate sentencing that locked up a lot of Black and brown people. And in Sharonda's case, with conspiracy in the federal level, you only need 2 or more people that agree to traffic drugs. And so even though no drugs were found, there was no physical evidence against her at all, here comes the role of snitches, the people who cooperate with the government. And that, coupled with the harsh 100-to-1 sentencing ratio, put Sharonda in prison for life. The co-conspirators in her case, and I'll be clear, and Sharonda's very clear about it as well, Sharonda was involved with drugs. There's no doubt about that. Her involvement was not anywhere near what the prosecutors attempted to lay out, and her involvement did not justify a life sentence. Sharonda was practically a drug mule, taking drugs for a drug supplier down the interstate to the buyers in Dallas. and she would get paid $1,000 for each trip, and she may have went on 3 or 4 trips a year, less than 10 the whole time. And she's the only one that went to trial. The other players chose to plead guilty because they knew the system, and Sharonda received the trial penalty. She was punished for that.
Right, and I kept wanting to know why the lawyer didn't warn her, you know, why he didn't say, like, you could get life if you lose, right? You kind of looked back, knowing what you know now, you know, and thought, Sharonda could be me. I mean, I dated a drug dealer. I could be caught up in this web. People could, you know, say things about me, and I could be, you know, left with a life sentence. You write in your book, I would fight for Sharonda's life as if it were my own, because it was. And you did, right? You decided, you looked at the laws, and I'm so glad you brought up the 100-to-1, you know, penalty, because it was so racist in its effect. One of my heroes of clemency that in the field where you are working is Professor Mark Osler, who started the first ever federal clemency clinic in the country at his law school, St. Thomas. And he took the Spears case up to the US Supreme Court that said that, and it was a Justice Scalia opinion that said that judges could categorically reject this 100-to-1 sentencing disparity. And you do such a beautiful job of just talking about Booker and Kimmerer and all these other cases and the whole legal landscape that led to some reforms going forward prospectively for new people charged, but left people like Sharonda and other people that you helped, that left them behind. And that's when you saw, I need another way to get these people out. And that way for you was presidential clemency.
Yes, I tried every avenue of relief that I could as I saw the landscape of federal drug sentencing evolve and reforms happen here and there. And I tried to pursue them for Sharonda. And I, by this time, had graduated law school and was fulfilling my Claire Huxtable dreams. I was a corporate lawyer, you know, working on her case pro bono at night. And I would try every avenue that I could just to be disappointed and find out that the laws weren't retroactive. And as I was learning and discovering this, it made no sense to me, because in my mind, I'm thinking, if it's wrong, if the law is wrong today, it was wrong yesterday. Right. And so I realized there's only one way that I could get Sharonda free. And as I thought through pursuing to help her, I'm like, have I just gotten her hopes up to let her down? You know, because that one way was presidential clemency. That's at the time was rarely granted. And clemency is where justice meets mercy. It is the sole exclusive power granted to the president through the Constitution. And it is sparingly used. You know, it definitely was at the time. And I always say I started clemency with Sharonda before clemency was cool. And, you know, that was our shot. And at the time, the president was Barack Obama.
Yeah, and he started his first term, and he was my state senator, my U.S. senator. I campaigned my heart out for him, and I was so elated along with the rest of the country when he was elected president. But his first term in office, he was very stingy with clemencies. So Mark Osler, the professor I spoke of earlier, started writing these op-ed pieces every Thanksgiving, you know, when they would do that ceremonial pardoning of the turkey at the White House. And he would say, like, pardon people, not turkeys. And so the Justice Department then announced this wonderful thing you wrote about in your book, saying, we want to grant clemency to nonviolent drug offenders. Get in your petitions. Here are the, you know, qualifications that we're looking for. And let's launch this, you know, Clemency Project 2014. And, you know, the hope was high among so many of us that there would be an equivalent number of clemencies, that the tens of thousands of people serving these sentences would get out. And so you signed up, I signed up, I got 2 cases. One of my guys, Charlie Lowry, had a life sentence. He got out, he got that clemency. And he got that letter that you talk about with your client, you know, from the president. My other guy didn't. He was torpedoed by the U.S. attorney in Waco where he was convicted. Fortunately, he is home now with his family only because of a house arrest situation because of COVID, because he'd done so much of his time. But I remember, like you, scrolling through the list of names of the people who got these small batches, and you go in the alphabetical order, right? And you get to you're looking for someone whose name ends in L, and then you get to the M's and his name wasn't there, and your heart would sink because you know he didn't get it this time. And time was running out, right?
Yes. I'm getting chills as you talk because it is an experience that it's hard to explain to people who didn't go through it themselves. And we think about our clients, you know, and I think it's good that we take time to process the impact it has on us as their advocates and attorneys. And I adore Mark Osler. I've worked with him. He's really great at what he does. And with the clemency, I filed Sharonda's clemency petition in November 2013. And a few months later, President Obama announced this historic clemency initiative. And it was exciting. It was a charged time, you know, and I filed a supplement for Sharonda. And, you know, a year passed, a year and a half passed, you know, and it's mental violence. The weight is mental violence. And, you know, it was a great time because President Obama's clemency record did have an uptick, but it was slow. It was very slow.
And, you know, you at the time were working for one of the fanciest law firms on the planet, Winstead, and, you know, fast tracked to become partner. And I worked at a firm called Mayer Brown before I became a public defender. And I know those 10-hour days you're talking about. Yes. But after those 10-hour days, I went home and, like, you know, walked the dog or something. And you went home and got out your papers to work on these clemencies, because it wasn't just Sharonda. You started taking on other cases as well.
I did.
Sharonda wasn't the first to be freed. It was a gentleman.
Yes, I started taking on other cases pro bono for clemency. My first clemency win was Donald Clark, and I filed his petition and Sharonda's on the same day. And it was a bittersweet day when I got the call that Donald received clemency. And I asked the attorney from the partner attorney's office, what about Sharonda Jones? And she said, well, if she got clemency, you know, you'll get a call today. I only have information for Donald. And I just remember sitting at my desk waiting for that call to come for Sharonda. And it didn't come. Yeah. And
I love the message that she wrote you in the book of, like, I'm happy for him. Don't worry, you know, my day will come. And it did, right? Tell about that happy day.
It did. December 18th, 2015 is a day I will never forget. It was a week full of anxiety because it was the week before President Obama and his family were going to Hawaii for the holidays, as they did every year. And we were just in hopes. It's Christmas. Surely he's going to grant clemencies, you know, and Monday passes and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. And that Friday he did. And Sharonda Jones was on that list. And through the gracious mercy of President Obama and with the stroke of his pen, you know, her life was saved.
Your book made me cry at the point where you get to do this amazing thing, which is to call her in prison to tell her. And you heard this silence for a while. And the guard, I think, spoke up and said, she had to put down the phone. She's crying.
Yes, it was so emotional. All those years, it had been 6 years since I had first taken on her case. 6 years. And after 16 years and 9 months, Sharonda Jones was going home.
And what I love about what you described then is that you didn't lose touch with her. You described these lovely moments where you would go lie on her couch and watch her in her own kitchen cooking, because she had gotten a kind of a reputation in the prison for being the person who could get stuff from the commissary and make little, culinary creations behind bars, and to see her actually, making these amazing meals in her own home was really healing for her and for you, right?
It was. She and I formed a very special relationship, like family. We're still the best of friends to this day. She lives less than 5 miles from me. We talk every day, and she was a phenomenal cook. She had her own restaurant before she went to prison, and she has a true passion for food. And there's just something really healing about it, her food. And for me, I told her all the time, she used me as her guinea pig, to try different recipes, but to know that she goes from this steel concrete cell to being in her own kitchen, free to cook whatever she wants without sneaking vegetables and food from prison commissary, risking getting put in solitary for that. It's a beautiful sight. It was truly a beautiful thing to see.
The male client that you freed, and I don't want to mispronounce his name, but he had sons that they'd spent their whole childhood without their dad. And the other part of your book that made me cry was the moment that he's out. You got him out. He's with his sons. And you said, there they stood, root and branch, right? Father and son, root and branch. And I thought, oh my goodness, to take fathers, mothers away from their children for these nonviolent drug offenses and to leave them literally rootless. It just seems so cruel to me. Give us some hope, Brittany. Talk to us about, in these times that are so divided, that are so scary, where there are still people like Sharonda languishing in prison that shouldn't be there. Give us some hope.
Yes, I will tie the hope to the title of the book, A Knock at Midnight. And the title of the book, one night, as you mentioned, when those clemency names come out, there's also a list of names that come out with denials. And one night there had been a huge rollout of clemency denials, and I was in a dark place, just feeling the weight of the pain of the families and the people who've been denied. And one of my clients in prison, Corey Jacobs, sent me the text of a Martin Luther King Jr. sermon called A Knock at Midnight. And in this sermon, Dr. King uses the parable of a man who knocks on his neighbor's door at midnight seeking bread. And the neighbor doesn't answer. And the man keeps knocking. And the neighbor doesn't answer. He says, my kids are asleep. And Dr. King equates the loaves of bread to faith, hope, and love. And Dr. King talks about in the parable how the man knocking on his neighbor's door at midnight is simply seeking the dawn. And I knew I was going to write about this scene in the book. And as I was writing the scene, I listened to the sermon over and over again. And I realized this is the backdrop of our freedom journey. And for everyone, 6 years of representing Sharonda, years of representing many other clients. And we were knocking and knocking. But we were simply seeking the dawn. And so the hope I want to give people is that dawn will come. Dawn will come. And we're in trying times right now, dealing with the pandemic, dealing with social justice uprisings that we see, and even though it was born through traumatic experiences, I get joy, in seeing people protesting and realizing the power of their voices, and that we're not the total sum of our pain. Black joy is a form of resistance, just like Black love is Black wealth. And working together with allies and accomplices, as I like to say, the dawn will come. The dawn will come.
Well, Brittany Barnett, I can't tell you what a delight it has been to have this time with you. Thank you so much for your life, for your work, and for this beautiful book. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. It's been a great pleasure.
That was a really lovely way that you unfolded your interview, Jean. I want to compliment you straight out. I like how you, especially because probably maybe many of the viewers had not yet read Brittany's book, and you really just took them through such a lovely journey of her life. And I'm sure Brittany's probably feeling the same thing. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I have a feeling you probably appreciated the gentleness and the insight that you brought to your interview. I was very impressed by that. Thank you so much for that hard work. I've seen a lot of interviewers at work, and that was a very skilled interview. Thank you so much for that. I do appreciate it. So we have a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time, and folks, feel free to please, the Q&A button is at the bottom center of your screen. You should be able to find it. So here's a question that was submitted actually prior to the event. It's from Katie in Chicago. It's two questions, so I'll start with the first one, and it's for Brittany. Brittany, how did you begin your work in criminal appeals and clemency? Maybe I can kind of put it together, actually. How did you begin your work in criminal appeals and clemency, and how could a new lawyer get involved in this work?
Great question. I began my work through my childhood friend's case, Keon Mitchell, and Sharonda Jones's case as a law student. And it was simply by educating myself and taking courses in criminal law that I could, and just really getting truly intimate with the cases. And as lawyers, I truly feel that no matter what type of law we practice, we should all be civil engineers for justice. And the way to get involved is to find an area of the criminal justice system that you're passionate about. It is so overwhelming even for me. And so I have to pick a niche that I'm the most effective in. And for me, that is life without parole sentences for drug offenses, and finding a niche that you're passionate about and compelling in, and then reach out to local organizations that are already doing the work. Because I can assure you there are many, and volunteer, if you're interested in life without parole work, we at the Buried Alive Project represent people serving life sentences under outdated federal drug laws, and we work with volunteer lawyers all the time. There's a clemency work that could be done. There's compassionate release clearinghouses that I could put you in touch with. It's just doing it.
Jean, did you want to offer any other additional thoughts on that? I know you have a
Oh,
lot
I
of
sure
experience.
do. I sure do. I want to put in a plug for the Illinois Prison Project, run by this amazing woman, Jenny Sobel, our executive director, who has gotten more and more people out through clemency in the state of Illinois. So for those of you who are local, who are watching this and interested, you should contact them. I'm on their board, and I'm so proud to be part of this effort.
And that was the Illinois Prison Project, correct? Is that what you said?
Yes.
One of our producers will put a link in chat for those people who want to kind of click on that. Just a reminder, when we send out the video in a few days, these various links that we're referring to will be in that email. So don't worry about trying to keep track of every single link right this second. We have a question from during the event right now from Maru. She's asking, Brittany, how do you, and probably both of you, how do you select your cases? How do you decide when there's obviously so many? How do you decide which one you're going to take?
Well, for us, we have a narrow pool of people serving life for drugs. It really only happens at the federal level, but still, like she said, there's hundreds of those cases. And so we really prioritize them on a first come, first served basis. Everyone is deserving of that shot at another chance at life. And it just depends on where we are in the legal climate, the policy world climate. And so right now we're able to help a lot of people who are serving time under those outdated crack cocaine laws. And we're able to help them through the First Step Act. And so we're prioritizing crack cocaine cases right now because that bill is so new still, and it's an avenue of relief.
The cool thing about clemency petitions is you don't have to be a lawyer to draft one or file one on behalf of someone.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yep.
That's interesting. Jean, can you offer a little bit of insight for folks about your two books? Talk a little bit about, especially perhaps your newest one, but maybe talk a little bit about how that book, maybe start with the newest one, about what it's about, how you came to write it.
Yeah, so at the beginning of this talk, we mentioned the tragedy in my family, the murders of my younger sister, Nancy, who was 25 years old, and her husband, Richard, who was 29, and their unborn baby, because the tragedy was compounded by the fact that Nancy was 3 months pregnant with what would have been their first child. And I wrote my first book, Change of Heart, about the journey from, being totally fine with this young man who killed them, getting a life in prison without the possibility of parole sentence, even though he was a child when he committed the crime. He was only 16 years old, just a month shy of his 17th birthday. And it just went through my journey of forgiveness, and then finally reaching out to him in reconciliation and telling him, I forgive you, and I'll come see you if you want me to, and going to visit him in prison and visiting him still. And there was such a reaction to that book, to that sense that you can redeem tragedy, that you don't have to be stuck in these cycles of vengeance and hate. And so that's when I wrote the second book. So this is my second book, Grace from the Rubble. And it's about another story of forgiveness and reconciliation. I grew up in Oklahoma City, even though I was born here in Winnetka and then moved back here for college at Northwestern. But my whole childhood was spent in Oklahoma City. And 25 years ago, this past April, there was the deadliest attack on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor, and the worst single act of domestic terrorism in the nation's history. Still, Timothy McVeigh, this angry white male who hated the government, blew up a federal building and killed 168 people inside, including this young woman whose father started out hating Tim McVeigh and wanting him dead, to forgiving him and reaching out to Tim's father, Bill McVeigh. And it's about this unlikely friendship and forgiveness and the strength and redemption that's to be found in reconciliation rather than revenge.
Well, that's pretty powerful. Brittany, what are your thoughts on that when you hear that about redemption and forgiveness? Where does that play in the work that you do?
It is core and center, especially working, just as Jean mentioned, in that field of life without parole. Life without parole is the second most severe penalty permitted by law in America. And to me, it screams a person is beyond hope and beyond redemption. I always say it suffocates mass potential as it buries people alive. And having that redemption at the core of it is very key. You had Sharonda Jones serving the same amount of time in prison as the Unabomber. And I think we have to sit with that as a country and really ask ourselves, is that the type of justice system that we want to pay for with our taxpayer dollars?
And I think we have time for one more question here that came in during the event. It's from Aziz, and he or she, I think he, asks, what is the government or law doing about stopping the stacking issue?
That is a really great question. And there are new efforts that I am heartened to see, and it'll fall in that criminal justice area of prosecutorial reform. Prosecutors have a lot of power, and they're the ones and able to stack these charges, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And so there are a lot of conversations starting to happen. I don't know what real reforms have been implemented so far, but at least the tide is turning, and prosecutorial reform is a huge critical topic right now.
Right, and so for you law students out there, because I know there are many of you, taking part in this event, that's one of the reasons that we don't just need, defense lawyers like me and Brittany. We need good people to become prosecutors so that they can exercise that discretion in a merciful way.
Okay, well, I want to thank you both for your time tonight and thank everyone for attending.